The Great Hall of Nexus Prime was built to impress. Crystal walls stretched up into darkness, and lights from 12 different worlds cast strange shadows across the floor. Representatives from across the galaxy sat in their assigned places, speaking in voices that had decided the fate of billions for over 300 years. But today, one chair sat empty. Ambassador Sarah Chen had walked out 3 days ago. Her words still echoed in the minds of every being present. Humanity withdraws from this council. We will no longer be bound by your laws of inaction. The Galactic Council had seen disagreements before. Species had argued, threatened, even stormed out of meetings. But none had ever formally withdrawn. The humans were the first. Councillor Zeftos of the Hegemony clicked his mandibles nervously. The insect-like being had served on the council for 40 years, and he had never seen anything like this. The humans had always been manageable, young, eager to please, willing to follow the rules that kept the galaxy stable. Perhaps we should discuss the human situation, said Councillor Prime Vex Thulin. The ancient being's voice carried the weight of centuries. His people, the progenitors, had built the council when most species were still learning to make fire. There is nothing to discuss, rumbled Thrakvor, the massive warrior from the Dominion. The humans threw a tantrum. They will return when they realize they need us. But Councillor Prime Vex Thulin was not so sure. He had read the reports from the Outer Rim. Something was happening out there, something that made his ancient instincts whisper warnings. The crisis had started 6 months ago on New Haven, a peaceful colony world inhabited by the Kithara. The blue-skinned Kithara were farmers and artists, completely defenseless against military attack. When the Vex High raiders came, they could only send desperate messages asking for help. The Vex High were a cancer in the galaxy. They took slaves, destroyed worlds, and sold suffering to the highest bidder. Everyone knew they needed to be stopped, but the council moved slowly. There were procedures to follow, committees to consult, diplomatic channels to explore. The humans had other ideas. Ambassador Chen had stood before the council and demanded immediate military action. Her dark eyes burned with fury as she described the Kithara children being loaded onto slave ships. She spoke of families torn apart, of peaceful cities burning, of 2 million innocent beings crying out for salvation. The council listened politely and voted to form a committee to study the situation. Chen had stood up slowly, her face pale with rage. While you debate, they die, she had said. Every day you waste talking, more innocents suffer. This council has forgotten what it means to protect people. Councillor Vex Thulin had tried to calm her. Young ambassador, we must consider the consequences of hasty action. Military intervention could escalate the situation. What if the Vex High target more colonies in response? Then we stop them there too, Chen had replied. That's what you do with predators. You don't negotiate with them. You don't try to understand their point of view. You stop them before they hurt more people. The debate had continued for weeks. Some council members supported limited action. Others wanted to try diplomacy first. The hegemony suggested economic sanctions that would take years to implement. The Dominion offered to send advisors, but no actual military support. Meanwhile, the reports from New Haven grew worse each day. Admiral Marcus Torres sat in his ready room aboard the TDF Valiant, reading the latest intelligence reports. The Terran Defense Fleet had been positioned near Council space for months, waiting for orders that never came. His ships were ready. His crews were trained. All they needed was permission to act. The communication system chimed. Admiral Torres looked up to see the grim face of Defense Minister Harrison on his screen. Admiral, we just received the Council's final decision on New Haven. Torres leaned forward. And strongly worded condemnation of Vex High actions. Economic sanctions to be implemented over the next 18 months. No military intervention authorized. Torres closed his eyes. He had served in the military for 30 years, had sworn an oath to protect the innocent. The council was asking him to watch. Genocide happened because they were afraid of making a decision. Sir, Torres said carefully, what are our orders? Minister Harrison was quiet for a long moment. President Walsh has spoken with the Joint Chiefs. We're done asking permission to do what's right. Torres felt something cold settle in his stomach. Sir, humanity is withdrawing from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. We will no longer be bound by their treaties or their restrictions. Harrison's voice grew harder. Admiral, you are authorized to take whatever action you deem necessary to protect innocent life in the Outer Rim. The screen went dark. Torres sat alone in his ready room, staring at the sealed orders that had been sitting in his safe for weeks. Orders that the council had forbidden him to open. orders that he was now free to carry out. He broke the seal and read quickly. His expression grew grim, then determined. Torres opened a channel to the fleet. All ships, this is Admiral Torres. We have new orders. Plot a course for the outer rim. Maximum speed. Captain Williams of the TDF Resolute appeared on his screen. Sir, the Council specifically forbade any military action in that sector. The Council no longer has authority over human forces, Torres replied. We have a job to do. Within hours, the Terran Defense Fleet was moving toward the edge of known space. Other species watched the human ships departing and assumed they were retreating in shame. The mighty humans, finally put in their place by superior Council wisdom. Back on Nexus Prime, the Council congratulated itself on handling the human problem so smoothly. Perhaps this will teach them proper respect for galactic law, said Councillor Vexathulan. Thrakvor laughed, a sound like grinding stone. The humans always thought they were special. Now they will learn what happens when you stand alone against the galaxy. But Councillor Zeftos was studying the tactical displays. The human fleet was not fleeing toward Earth. They were heading directly for Vex-High territory, and their formation was not that of a retreating force. It was the formation of an attack fleet. 3 days later, the first reports began arriving. A human battle group had engaged a Vex-High raider fleet near the Korvash mining station. The raiders had been completely destroyed. No human casualties. Then came reports of more battles. Human ships were appearing throughout the outer rim, hunting down Vex-High forces with surgical precision. The raiders, who had terrorized the galaxy for decades, were being systematically destroyed. The Council was baffled. Human military technology was good, but not exceptional. Their ships were solid, but unremarkable. How were they achieving such decisive victories against the Vex-High, who were known for their brutal effectiveness in combat? Councillor Zeftos requested detailed analysis of the battle wreckage. What he found made his blood run cold. The humans had been holding back. For decades, they had been deliberately limiting their own capabilities to comply with Council regulations. Their weapons had been operating at reduced power. Their engines had been restricted to safe speeds. Their defensive systems had been artificially weakened, all to maintain the galactic balance that the Council prized so highly. Now, freed from those restrictions, human technology was revealing its true nature, and it was terrifying. The galaxy had assumed that humanity would come crawling back to the Council within weeks, begging to be readmitted. Instead, the humans were systematically dismantling one of the most feared military forces in known space. And they were just getting started. The chair that had sat empty for 3 days would remain empty for much longer. The humans had made their choice. They would no longer ask permission to do what was right. The galaxy was about to learn what that meant. 3 months had passed since the humans walked away from the Galactic Council. 3 months of watching their empty chair and pretending everything was normal. But normal was becoming impossible to maintain. The reports came in daily now, each one more disturbing than the last. Human warships were engaging Vex-High forces across 17 different sectors, not just engaging them, but destroying them completely. The raiders who had terrorized the Outer Rim for centuries were being hunted like animals. Councillor Zeftos spread the latest intelligence reports across his desk. The numbers made no sense. In the past week alone, human forces had destroyed 43 Vex-High ships, while losing only 2 of their own. These were not the kinds of numbers anyone expected from the junior species of the galaxy. Perhaps we underestimated their capabilities, suggested his aide, a younger hegemony officer named Kliktar. Zeftos clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. No, we observed their capabilities for decades. Their technology was adequate but unremarkable. Something has changed. He pulled up a detailed analysis of the latest battle. The human ships had used weapons that should not exist in their arsenal. Plasma cannons that burned through Vex-High armor like paper. Kinetic missiles that moved at impossible speeds. Most confusing of all, their ships seemed to accelerate and maneuver in ways that violated several Council treaties on safe spaceflight. The truth hit him like a physical blow. "Get me a complete review of all human Council treaties," he ordered. "I want every restriction, every limitation, every safety protocol they agreed to follow." Kliktar worked quickly, bringing up hundreds of documents. Treaties on weapons limitations, engine safety protocols, defensive system regulations, all designed to maintain what the Council called galactic balance, making sure no one species became too powerful. Zeftos read through them with growing horror. The humans had agreed to limit their plasma weapons to 60% power output. Their engines were restricted to speeds that wouldn't destabilize shipping lanes. Their defensive shields were capped at levels deemed appropriate for their development stage. "By the Ancient Ones," he whispered. "They've been fighting with one hand tied behind their backs for 50 years. The implications were staggering. If the humans had been deliberately holding back their true capabilities, what else were they hiding? How powerful were they really?" Admiral Torres stood on the bridge of the TDF Valiant, watching the tactical display with satisfaction. The Vex-High stronghold of Grimjaw Station was burning, its slave pens finally empty. The rescued Kithara civilians were being transferred to medical ships, their blue skin pale from months of captivity. "Admiral," called Commander Roberts from the communication station, "we're receiving a transmission from the Council. They're demanding we explain our actions and return to negotiations." Torres almost smiled. The Council was finally paying attention. "Tell them we're busy," he said. "They can read about our actions in the casualty reports." Captain Williams approached from the tactical station. "Sir, long-range sensors are detecting 3 more Vex-High battle groups moving toward the Kalani system. Intelligence suggests they're planning to raid the agricultural colonies there." "Then we stop them," Torres said simply. "Send the coordinates to Battle Group 7. Have them intercept and destroy." It felt good to give clear orders with clear objectives. No committees to consult, no diplomatic considerations to weigh. Just simple military logic. Find the enemy, destroy the enemy, protect the innocent. The Kalani were a peaceful farming people, much like the Kithara. They grew crops that fed half the outer rim and had never hurt anyone. The idea of Vex-High raiders, burning their fields and enslaving their children made Torres's jaw clench with rage. "Sir," Roberts called again, "Battle Group 7 reports contact with the enemy. They're requesting permission to engage." "Granted," Torres said without hesitation. "And remind them, no survivors. The Vex-High chose to be monsters. We're just giving them what they deserve." The battle was over in 20 minutes. 3 Vex-High ships destroyed, no human casualties. The raiders never even got close to Kalani space. But the real surprise came 3 days later, when a Kalani delegation arrived at the human fleet. Their leader, a tall being with golden skin and sad eyes, requested permission to board the Valiant. "Admiral Torres," the Kalani said in careful standard. "I am Speaker Velani of the Kalani Agricultural Collective. We come to thank you for protecting our children." Torres felt uncomfortable with the gratitude. "We were just doing our job, Speaker." "No," Velani said firmly. "You were doing what the Council should have done years ago. We have suffered under Vex-High raids for decades. Always, we asked the Council for protection. Always, they told us to be patient while they studied the situation." The Speaker reached into his robes and pulled out a formal document. "The Kalani Collective wishes to offer humanity a formal defense agreement. We will provide food and supplies to your fleets in exchange for protection from raiders." Torres stared at the document. A direct alliance, bypassing the Council entirely. It was exactly the kind of thing that would have been impossible 3 months ago. "I'll need to check with Earth Command," he said finally. The answer came back. Within hours, accepted. Word of the Kalani agreement spread quickly through the Outer Rim. Within days, other species were sending their own delegations to the human fleet. The peaceful Ilani, who had been terrorized by pirates for decades, offered exclusive mining rights in exchange for patrol routes. The Korvash Station Collective wanted to renegotiate their trading agreements directly with Earth. All of them had the same story. Years of asking the Council for help, years of being told to wait while committees studied their problems. Now they had found someone who actually acted when action was needed. Back on Nexus Prime, the Council watched their carefully maintained order crumble. Species that had been bound by complex treaties for centuries were forming direct alliances with humanity. The humans offered something the Council never could: immediate, effective action. "This cannot continue," declared Councilor Prime Vex Thulin during an emergency session. "The humans are disrupting the entire galactic order. They are acting without authorization, ignoring established protocols, undermining our authority." "Perhaps," suggested Councilor Yeath of the Trade Federation, "we should consider why so many species are choosing to work with them instead of us." The chamber fell silent. Such questions were not asked in polite council society. Thrakvor of the Dominion slammed his fist on his podium. "Because they are young and foolish. They see quick action and think it is better than careful consideration. They do not understand the consequences of destabilizing established order." But privately, even Thrakvor was beginning to worry. His military advisors had been studying the human combat reports, and what they found was troubling. The humans were not just fighting more effectively, they were fighting differently. Their tactics were brutal, efficient, and utterly without mercy for those who preyed on the innocent. More disturbing were the intelligence reports from human space. Their shipyards, which had been producing a steady but unremarkable number of vessels for decades, were suddenly working around the clock. Industrial capacity that had been limited by council trade agreements was now operating at maximum efficiency, and there were reports of new construction projects, research stations in the deep void, working on projects that violated numerous council treaties on weapons development, military facilities being built at unprecedented speed. Councillor Zeftos reviewed the latest intelligence with growing dread. The humans were not just ignoring council restrictions, they were actively preparing for something bigger. How long have they been planning this? He wondered aloud. His aide Kliktar looked up from his datapad. Sir? The withdrawal from the council. The sudden military effectiveness. The industrial expansion. This was not a spontaneous decision. They have been preparing for this for years. The implications were terrifying. If the humans had been planning to leave the council, what else had they been planning? What other capabilities were they hiding? The galaxy had thought humanity was just another young species, eager to please and easy to control. Now it was becoming clear that the humans had been playing a much longer game, and the council was beginning to realize that they had no idea what humanity was really capable of. The empty chair in the Great Hall seemed to mock them now, a reminder of their own blindness. They had spent decades telling themselves that they were guiding humanity's development, teaching them the proper way to behave in galactic society. Instead, humanity had been learning their weaknesses, studying their methods, and preparing for the day when they would no longer need council approval to do what they thought was right. That day had come, and the galaxy was about to discover what an unrestricted human military could actually accomplish. The liberation of New Haven changed everything. Admiral Torres stood in the command center of the orbital station above the Kythera homeworld, watching the rescue operations through the main viewport. Below, human medical ships worked alongside Kythera vessels to treat the survivors who had been brought back from Vex High slave camps. The numbers were better than anyone had dared hope. Of the 2 million Kythera who had been taken from New Haven, almost half had been recovered alive. The Vex High had kept them in decent condition because healthy slaves sold for better prices. It was a cold calculation that had accidentally saved hundreds of thousands of lives. "Admiral!" called Captain Williams from the communications station. "We have another delegation requesting permission to board. This time it's the Alani High Council." Torres nodded. It was the 5th delegation this week. Word of the successful rescue operation had spread across the Outer Rim faster than hyperspace communications. Every species that had ever suffered under raider attacks was suddenly very interested in talking to humanity. The Alani representatives were tall, thin beings, with silver skin that seemed to shimmer in the station's lights. Their leader, High Counselor Zarathil, moved with the careful grace of someone who had never expected to be having this conversation. "Admiral Torres," she said, in the musical Ilani language translated by Universal Communicators, "we come to discuss mutual protection agreements." Torres had heard this phrase many times in recent weeks. It always meant the same thing. Another species wanted humanity to do what the Galactic Council would not. "The Ilani have suffered under pirate raids for over 30 years, Zarathil continued. "Our people are artists and philosophers, not warriors. We have asked the Council for protection repeatedly. Always they tell us that military intervention must be carefully considered." She gestured to a datapad held by one of her assistants. 3 weeks ago, pirates attacked our colony of Silver Falls. They took 200 of our people as slaves. We sent an emergency request to the Council. They are still forming a committee to study the situation." Torres felt the familiar anger building in his chest. The same pattern, over and over. Innocent people suffering while bureaucrats debated and delayed. "What are you proposing?" he asked. "The Ilani controls 17 star systems rich in rare minerals," Zarathil said. "We offer exclusive mining rights to human corporations in exchange for naval protection. Our engineers can also provide advanced crystalline technology for your ships." It was a generous offer. The Alani were known throughout the galaxy for their crystal-based technology, which could improve everything from communications to energy storage. But Torres was more interested in the human lives it could save. "I'll need to consult with Earth Command," he said, "but I think we can work something out." The answer came back within 6 hours. Approved. The Alani became the 4th species to sign a direct defense pact with humanity, bypassing the Council entirely. Back on Nexus Prime, Counselor Prime Vex Thulin watched the dominoes fall with growing alarm. The carefully constructed web of treaties and dependencies that had held the galaxy together for centuries was unraveling before his eyes. "We must act," he declared during yet another emergency session. The humans are systematically undermining our authority. If this continues, the entire council system will collapse. Councillor Zeftos clicked his mandibles nervously. Perhaps we should ask ourselves why so many species are choosing human protection over council arbitration. The question hung in the air like an accusation. No one wanted to answer it. Thrakvor of the Dominion had no such hesitation. "Because they are fools," he roared. "They see immediate results and think it is better than proper process. They do not understand that hasty action leads to greater problems." "And what greater problems have resulted from human action?" asked Councillor Yeath quietly. "The Vex High raids have stopped. The slave trade in the Outer Rim has been disrupted. Innocent civilians who were dying while we debated are now alive and free." Thrakvor's massive frame seemed to swell with indignation. "The humans have upset the balance of power. They have acted without authorization. They have violated numerous treaties." "Treaties they are no longer bound by," Yith pointed out, "since they left the council." The debate continued for hours, but the real problem was becoming impossible to ignore. The humans were not just more effective than the council, they were proving that the council's methods were unnecessary. Every successful human operation made the council's careful procedures look more foolish. Meanwhile, the intelligence reports from human space were growing more disturbing. Their industrial capacity was expanding at an impossible rate. New shipyards were coming online every week. Their research stations in the deep void were working on projects that council scientists couldn't even identify. Most troubling of all were the reports from the battlefields. Human military tactics were evolving rapidly, becoming more sophisticated and more brutal. They were learning from every engagement, adapting their strategies with frightening speed. Councillor Zeftos had been studying the tactical recordings, and what he found kept him awake at night. The humans were not just better equipped than expected. They were better trained, better organized, and far more ruthless than anyone had imagined. "Sir," his aide Kliktar said during one of their private briefings, "the analysis of the New Haven rescue operation is complete. The human Marines who assaulted the slave camps. They fought like nothing we have ever seen." Zeftos reviewed the recordings with growing unease. Human soldiers moving through Vex High fortifications like they were built for it. Perfect coordination between units. Devastating efficiency in close combat. And when they found the slave pens, their fury had been terrible to witness. The Vex High guards who had been torturing Cathara children had not been given the option to surrender. "They did not just defeat the enemy," Kliktar observed. "They made examples of them." This was the part that truly worried the council. The humans were not content to simply win battles. They were sending messages. Raiders and slavers across the galaxy were beginning to whisper that attacking human-protected species meant certain death. It was working. Pirate activity in the Outer Rim had dropped by 70% in just 3 months. Admiral Torres reviewed the latest intelligence reports from his flagship. The Vex High were in complete disarray, their leadership structure shattered by constant human attacks. But more interesting were the reports about other criminal organizations. The Crimson Syndicate, which had controlled illegal weapons trading for decades, had apparently decided that the Outer Rim was becoming too dangerous for business. The Blood Moon pirates had abandoned 3 major bases rather than risk confrontation with human patrols. "They're afraid," observed Captain Williams during their daily briefing. "For the first time in anyone's memory, the predators are afraid of being hunted." Torres nodded grimly. Fear was a tool, just like any weapon. Used properly, it could save more lives than any amount of firepower. "Sir," called Commander Roberts from communications, "we are receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command. Fleet Admiral Jang wants to speak with you immediately." The hologram of Fleet Admiral Jang appeared in the center of the briefing room. The older woman's expression was serious as she delivered her message. "Admiral Torres, I'm sure you're aware that the Council has been making increasingly hostile statements about human actions in the Outer Rim. Our intelligence suggests they're preparing some kind of response." Torres felt ice in his stomach. "What kind of response, ma'am?" "Unknown. But they've been quietly mobilizing their combined fleets. Nothing official yet. But the signs are there. I want you to be prepared for anything." The transmission ended, leaving Torres alone with his thoughts. The Council had been content to complain and threaten as long as they thought humanity would eventually return to their authority. But now it was becoming clear that wasn't going to happen. The humans had found something better than Council membership. They had found species who appreciated action over discussion, results over procedure. The network of defense pacts and trade agreements was growing stronger every day. But strength had a way of making enemies. And the Galactic Council was beginning to realize that they might need to teach humanity a lesson about respect for established Authority. Torres opened a secure channel to Earth Command. If the Council wanted to make this a fight, humanity would be ready. The galaxy had spent centuries believing that slow, careful deliberation was the mark of civilization. The humans were proving that sometimes the civilized thing to do was to act quickly and decisively to protect the innocent. The Council could debate the philosophy all they wanted. But the results spoke for themselves. The Outer Rim was safer than it had been in decades, and species that had suffered for generations were finally finding peace. If that upset the established order, then perhaps it was time for a new order. The dominoes would continue to fall until only one structure remained standing, and Torres was determined that it would be the one built on protecting people rather than protecting procedures. The ultimatum arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a Council diplomatic vessel that refused to enter Earth's orbital defense zone. The message was clear, formal, and utterly final. President Catherine Walsh read it aloud to the global assembly, her voice carrying across the chamber and to billions of humans watching around the world. The Galactic Council hereby demands that humanity cease all unauthorized military actions, dissolve all illegal defense agreements with non-Council species, and return to Council authority within 30 standard days. Failure to comply will result in appropriate sanctions, up to and including military intervention. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then President Walsh set the datapad down and looked directly into the cameras. The answer is no. The applause was thunderous. Representatives from every continent rose to their feet, voices raised in defiant unity. Outside, crowds gathered in major cities around the world, chanting their support for the decision that everyone knew was coming. Humanity will not abandon those who asked for our protection, Walsh continued when the noise finally died down. We will not return to a system that values procedure over people, that chooses bureaucracy over basic human decency. The Council has made their position clear, so have we. 3 weeks later, the combined Council fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system. Admiral Torres stood on the bridge of the TDF Valiant, now flagship of the reformed Terran Space Command, watching the sensor readings with grim satisfaction. 3,000 ships representing the military might of 12 different civilizations, the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. They had come expecting to find a defiant, but ultimately outmatched human force. A few hundred ships at most, manning defensive positions around Earth and hoping that Council mercy would spare human civilization from complete destruction. Instead, they found something that should not have been possible. "My God," whispered Captain Williams, staring at the tactical display. "Sir, are you seeing this?" Torres nodded slowly. The Sol system was surrounded by a defensive grid that made the legendary progenitor fortresses look primitive. Weapon platforms that twisted space itself into deadly configurations. Automated defense stations that could track and engage thousands of targets simultaneously. Energy barriers that could absorb the output of entire fleets and redirect it back at attackers. But most impressive of all were the ships. "Fleet Admiral Zhang to all vessels," came the voice over the communication system. "Deploy to defensive positions. Show them what humanity can do when we stop asking permission." The human fleet emerged from stealth positions throughout the system. Not hundreds of ships, but thousands. Vessels that incorporated technology that should have taken centuries to develop. Designs that seemed to bend the laws of physics, while somehow remaining elegant and purposeful. The Council fleet commanders stared at their sensor readings in disbelief. Where had all these ships come from? How had humanity built such a massive fleet in just a few months? The answer was simple, though none of them understood it yet. For 50 years, humanity had been building according to Council regulations, limited production quotas, restricted materials, mandatory design approvals, all of it designed to keep human industrial capacity within acceptable limits. Now freed from those restrictions, human industry had exploded into activity. Shipyards that had been producing 10 vessels per month were now producing 10 per day. Factories that had been limited to basic alloys were now working with materials that the Council had classified as too dangerous for junior species. And the humans had been very busy with their research programs. Admiral Vorth of the Council fleet opened a communication channel to the human vessels. "This is Admiral Vorth of the Galactic Council Combined Fleet. You are ordered to stand down immediately and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will be met with overwhelming force." Fleet Admiral Zhang's response was broadcast on all frequencies, her voice calm and utterly confident. "This is Fleet Admiral Zhang of the Terran Space Command. You are in sovereign human space. Without permission. Turn around and leave now, or be destroyed." Admiral Vorth actually laughed. 3,000 ships against perhaps 2,000 human vessels? The outcome was certain. The battle lasted exactly 17 minutes. It began when the Council fleet opened fire, confident that their superior numbers would carry the day. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds filled space between the two forces, creating a deadly light show that would have been beautiful if it weren't so lethal. Then the human ships responded. The weapons that emerged from human vessels defied everything the Council thought they knew about military technology. Gravitational cannons that twisted enemy ships into metallic pretzels, antimatter torpedoes that released the energy of small stars, defensive fields that didn't just deflect incoming fire but absorbed it, stored it, and sent it back at the attackers, with compound interest. But the true shock came when the humans deployed their newest innovation. Ships that moved like they were alive, reacting to threats faster than any computer system could manage. Vessels that seemed to predict enemy movements before they happened. Counselor Zeftos, watching from the bridge of the Council flagship, finally understood what he was seeing. "They're not using artificial intelligence," he whispered in horror. "Those ships are piloted by human consciousness. They've digitized their own minds and merged them with their vessels. It was technology that violated every Council treaty on cybernetic enhancement. The humans had created hybrid beings that were neither fully organic nor artificial, entities that combined human intuition with computer processing power. The Council fleet found themselves fighting an enemy that could think, adapt, and react. At the speed of light, ship after ship fell to the human assault. Not destroyed, Torres noted with satisfaction, but disabled. Their weapons taken offline, their engines crippled, their crews captured rather than killed. It was a demonstration of power so precise and overwhelming that several species began surrendering without firing another shot. The Hegemony Fleet Commander was the first to break. "This is Admiral Zektol to all Hegemony vessels. Cease fire and prepare to surrender. We cannot win this battle." The Trade Federation followed within minutes. Then the Mining Collective. One by one, the Council alliance crumbled as each species realized they were facing something beyond their ability to fight. Only the Dominion and the Progenitors continued to resist. Thrakvor commanded the Dominion fleet from his massive dreadnought, the pride of his warrior people. He had never retreated from a battle, had never admitted defeat. He would not start now. "All Dominion vessels advance and engage. Show these upstart humans what real warriors can do." The Dominion ships charged forward, their crews roaring battle cries that had echoed across battlefields for 1,000 years. They were the finest warriors in the galaxy, veterans of countless conflicts. They lasted 4 minutes. The human response was surgical in its precision. Dominion ships found their weapons disabled before they could fire. Their armor was penetrated by weapons that seemed to ignore physical laws. Their shields were overloaded by energy bursts that appeared out of nowhere. Thrakvor watched his proud fleet reduced to floating wreckage in minutes. As his own ship's systems began failing around him, he opened a final communication to the "Human Commander!" "You fight without honor," he growled. "This is not warfare. This is execution." Admiral Torres appeared on his screen, his expression grim but not unsympathetic. "You're right. It's not warfare. Warfare suggests both sides have a chance to win. This is what happens when you threaten our people and our allies." The Dominion Dreadnought's main power core went offline. Emergency lighting cast red shadows across the bridge as Thrakvor considered his options. He could order his ship to self-destruct, taking some humans with him, or he could admit what everyone else already knew. He chose surrender. That left only the Progenitors. Counselor Prime Vex Thulin stood alone on the bridge of the ancient vessel that had served as the Council flagship for over 2 centuries. His people had built the galactic civilization that the humans were now dismantling. They had created the laws, the treaties, the careful balance that had maintained peace for millennia. Now it was all coming apart because one young species had decided they knew better. "Admiral Torres," he said over an open channel, "I propose a ceasefire. Surely we can resolve this through negotiation." Torres's response was immediate. "The time for negotiation ended when you brought a fleet to threaten Earth. Surrender now, or join the rest of your allies in defeat." Vex Thulin looked around his bridge at the crew members who had served the Council faithfully for centuries. They were waiting for his orders, ready to die for the principles they had spent their lives defending. But what principles were those, really? The right to debate while innocents suffered. The privilege of maintaining order at the cost of justice? "All progenitor vessels," he said finally, "stand down and prepare to surrender." The Sol system fell silent, except for the hum of human ships moving to secure their prisoners. In 17 minutes, the combined might of 12 civilizations had been not just defeated, but humiliated. But the real message was not in the victory itself. It was in how completely the humans had controlled the battle. They could have destroyed every council ship in the system. Instead, they had chosen to capture them. To make it clear, the 6 months after the Battle of Sol, the galaxy operated under a very different set of rules. Admiral Torres stood on the observation deck of humanity's newest station, positioned at the former site of the Council's military headquarters in the Nexus system. The irony was not lost on him. Where the Council had once debated and delayed, human ships now moved with purpose and efficiency. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see the daily patrol routes, human vessels working alongside ships from a dozen different species, all flying under the banner of the Terran Protection Compact. It was not the Empire that some had feared, but something more like a neighborhood watch program on a galactic scale. "Admiral," called Captain Williams from behind him, "the quarterly reports are ready for your review." Torres turned and accepted the datapad, though he already knew what it would say. The numbers told a story that even the Council could not argue with. Piracy in the Outer Rim was down 87%. The slave trade had been reduced to scattered, terrified groups hiding in the deepest parts of space. Species that had lived in fear for generations were finally able to focus on art, science, and peaceful development. "Any word from the Council?" Torres asked. Williams smiled slightly. "They've been very quiet lately, though intelligence reports that they're trying to rebrand themselves as a cultural exchange organization. The Galactic Council still existed, technically. They still met in their crystal halls and debated important issues like trade regulations and diplomatic protocols. But real power had shifted to the Terran Protection Compact, and everyone knew it. The transition had not been entirely smooth. Some species had tried to resist the new order, clinging to the old ways of doing business. The hegemony had attempted to reassert their authority over their former client states, only to discover that those states preferred human protection to hegemony exploitation. A few criminal organizations had tested human resolve, believing that the victory over the Council was a fluke. They learned quickly that it was not. The Crimson Syndicate had made the mistake of attacking a Cathara agricultural station, thinking that one small raid would not bring human retaliation. The entire Syndicate leadership was dead within a week, their operations dismantled with surgical precision. The message was clear. There would be no going back to the old ways. President Walsh reviewed the latest diplomatic reports from her office in Geneva. Representatives from 43 different species had requested formal membership in the Terran Protection Compact. Not because they were forced to, but because they wanted the security and stability that came with human protection. The application process was surprisingly simple. Species that requested membership had to meet only a few basic requirements: no slavery, no aggressive expansion, no targeting of civilian populations. Beyond that, they were free to govern themselves however they chose. It was a stark contrast to the Council's complex web of regulations and restrictions that had governed galactic civilization for centuries. "Madam President," her aide announced, "Speaker Velani of the Kalani is here for his appointment." The golden-skinned Kalani entered, with the same quiet dignity he had shown 6 months earlier when his people were still being terrorized by raiders. Now, his agricultural collective was one of the most prosperous regions in the galaxy. "Speaker Velani," Walsh said warmly, "how can we help you today?" "Actually, Madam President, I come to offer help to you. The Kalani have been discussing ways to show our gratitude for human protection. We would like to establish a joint research program with your agricultural scientists." It was typical of the new relationships humanity was building. Not the one-sided exploitation that had characterized much of Council politics, but genuine partnerships between equals. The Cathara had become humanity's closest allies, their natural talents for biotechnology combining with human engineering to create medical breakthroughs that saved lives across the galaxy. The Alani's crystalline technology had revolutionized human communications, allowing near-instantaneous contact across vast distances. Even some former Council loyalists were quietly requesting protection as the old order crumbled around them. On the bridge of the TDF Valiant, now stationed in the Outer Rim, Admiral Torres received a communication that made him smile. "Sir," reported Commander Roberts, "we're receiving a distress call from the Zephyrian trade convoy. They're under attack by pirates in the Corridan Nebula." The Zephyrians had been one of the Council's most vocal critics of human aggression. They had publicly condemned the liberation of New Haven and had called for sanctions against humanity. But when pirates threatened their merchant ships, they had swallowed their pride and called for help. "Response time to the Corridan Nebula?" Torres asked. 43 minutes at maximum burn, sir." "Then we'd better hurry. Dispatch the 5th Battle Group and remind them we protect everyone who asks for help, regardless of their politics." It was a principle that humanity had held to strictly. Even species that opposed them received protection when they needed it. The goal was not to punish or control, but simply to make the galaxy a safer place for everyone. The rescue operation was textbook perfect. The pirates were disabled and captured, the Zephyrian ships were escorted to safety, and the trade convoy continued on its way. No speeches about human superiority, no demands for gratitude or political concessions, just quiet competence and a job well done. Later that day, the Zephyrian government submitted a formal application to join the Terran Protection Compact. The deepest parts of space, where the old Council authority had never reached, a different kind of change was taking place. The criminal networks that had operated with impunity for decades were being systematically hunted down by human special operations teams. These were not the conventional naval battles that had destroyed the Vexhai. These were precise, surgical strikes against the worst predators in the galaxy. Slave traders found their operations exposed and their leaders arrested. Weapons smugglers discovered that their secret bases were not as secret as they had thought. The fear that had once protected criminals was now working against them. Word spread through the underworld that attacking human-protected targets meant death, and that human intelligence networks had eyes everywhere. It was not perfect. Crime could never be completely eliminated, but for the first time in galactic history, the predators were afraid of being hunted. 5 years after humanity's withdrawal from the Council, a young Cathara named Jarathil approached Admiral Torres during a ceremony marking the anniversary of New Haven's liberation. She was one of the children who had been rescued from Vex-High slave camps, now grown into a promising young scientist. "Admiral," she said in careful standard, "may I ask you a question?" Torres nodded. He had always made time for the survivors, considering their welfare to be the ultimate measure of his success. "My teachers say that humans are different from other species, that you fight differently, think differently. But I have lived among your people for 5 years now, and you seem very much like us. You love your families, you mourn your dead, you celebrate your victories. So what makes you different?" Torres considered the question carefully. It was one he had been asked many times, by many different species. "I think," he said finally, "it's not that we're different in what we feel. It's different in what we're willing to do about those feelings. The Council spent so long trying to maintain peace that they forgot why peace matters. We never did." Jarathil tilted her head, the way Cathara did when they were thinking deeply. "You mean that you fight not because you love war, but because you love peace?" "Something like that," Torres agreed. "We learned a long time ago that sometimes the only way to protect innocent people is to be willing to hurt those who would harm them. The Council was afraid to make that choice. We weren't." The young Cathara nodded slowly. "That is why my people trust you. Not because you are strong, but because you use your strength to protect rather than to conquer." Torres looked out at the mixed fleet patrolling nearby space, ships from dozens of species working together to keep the peace. It was not the galaxy he had expected to help build when he first put on a uniform. But it was a better galaxy than the one he had grown up in. "The Council was not evil," he said quietly. "They meant well. But meaning well is not enough when people are suffering. Sometimes you have to choose between being polite and being right." As the ceremony continued around them, Torres reflected on how much had changed. The galaxy had indeed trembled when humanity abandoned the Council, but it had not been fear of human aggression that caused that trembling. It had been hope. Hope that finally someone was willing to act decisively to protect the innocent. Hope that the age of bureaucratic paralysis was ending. Hope that justice could be swift and mercy could be strong. The humans had not conquered the galaxy. They had simply reminded it what protection looked like when it was offered freely, without conditions or politics or endless committees, and species across the stars had decided that this was the kind of protection they wanted. The new order was not built on fear or domination. It was built on the simple human principle that with great power comes the absolute responsibility to protect those who cannot pee.